All right.
So,
Well, hi, and thanks once again for joining me at Pastors Positive Mental Health Institute. I'm Kirk, glad to be here with you. As you can see, another wonderful guest with a wonderful set of hair. I don't know how you did that. I was a musician too, but it didn't last. But I just really appreciate Ronnie Martin and the work that he's doing and has done over the years. If you like this podcast or find it beneficial, please like, share, and subscribe as we help the church flourish. But without waiting any longer, let's jump right in. I want to introduce you to Pastor Ronnie Martin. And so, really, Ronnie, I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of just, introduce yourself. What led you to ministry is kind of where I like to start, as we're seeing some trends in that with pastors. So, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the pastoral ministry.
yeah, well, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I've been married 29 years to Melissa. We have an older daughter, an adult daughter who lives and works in Chicago. We relocated to Ohio almost 14 years ago, and we've planted a couple churches since being here. So I'm a lead pastor currently, a church planter, and also do some work with a church planting network called Harbor Network. So I do a lot of pastoral, kind of pastoring pastors kind of work with that network. And yeah, so this goes back probably going 20 years now, the way the Lord brought me into ministry. Like a lot of people, it wasn't something that was in my vision, and the Lord brought me into it kind of, through music and audio, and kind of wound me through that path before I got into the current role I'm in. And just going all the way back to California, I was born and raised in Southern California, and just involved in some kind of local church, local ministry for years and years. And then it just got more serious about 20 years ago, and the Lord just kind of opened up some doors and kind of led my path down to more, full-time vocational ministry. So it's like a lot of ministry paths out there. There's no really straight path. They just wind all over the place when you talk to everybody. Mine was no different. So
Yeah. Now, I've listened to some other interviews with you, and it seems like you had a one or a few people who kind of spoke into your life that maybe encouraged you on this path. Could you speak to that just for a moment?
yeah, I mean, that was pretty important in my story. I think when I felt like, this idea of ministry was first entering my mind as even a consideration, it was because some pastors were very intentional about kind of reaching into my life. And that had never happened to me before. I'd been involved in church for years and years, but these are men that kind of sought me out. They kind of grabbed me. They said, "Hey, I want to talk to you. I want to learn, a little bit more about your life. I want to get your story." And that's what they did. So it was really the direct result of a couple of men taking a high level interest in me, asking me good questions, caring for me in some ways that I'd never been cared for, and then kind of opening up this idea of, maybe the Lord wants to use my gifts and talents, however meager, to bring me down that ministry path, and into pastoring. And so I think that was pretty key for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to encourage pastors who listen to this. Don't be afraid to pose the question to younger people or other gentlemen in your congregation. Say, have you ever thought of ministry? And let's see where that takes us, and spend some time with them. I love that they were intentional about hearing your story. As we know, one of the things that builds pastors' positive mental health is when people share their stories with them. And so it's important that we are intentional about taking that time with them, and we walk in this journey along with them. And I know that you have planted, now you said two churches. And one of the things is they're not huge churches from what I understand, which I really appreciate your heart, because we look at the statistics, and the average church is not that large. We
Mm.
have some big outliers, right? And but most churches are just really family oriented, and can be safe, hopefully, for people. And you're in a kind of a rural area, if I understand right. So can you kind of tell me about your church and kind of what's going on there?
Yeah, so we planted almost 11 years ago in a town called Ashland, Ohio. This is like this is like a mid-sized town. So it's a university town, about 25,000. And I say mid-size. So if coming from Southern California, this felt really small to me.
Yeah.
But you can talk to people that are in towns of 500 people, and they're going to go, "That's not so small, Ronnie." But relatively speaking, it's a small town, a university town, right in between. It's a halfway point between Cleveland and Columbus. And yeah, we just felt called to this area, like I said, about 13, 14 years ago, and then eventually led us to planting. And so what we did was we kind of looked at the landscape of the town, and there's a lot of churches within the county. Most of the churches are kind of in the outer line, more like rural areas. And my vision was to plant a church in the downtown, which had a lot of this revitalization kind of going on. And we wanted to be a part of that. So we were able to find a space right in the middle of the downtown where all this rebuilding was happening and just kind of position ourselves right there. And we've been there ever since. We meet an old furniture warehouse that we've kind of, revitalized a little bit, done some work to. But really, I mean, beyond just aesthetics and just sort of the actual place, we just wanted to plant, just a very simple gospel-centered church, expositional preaching. Again, something where we can just get down to, what does it mean for us to be the body of Christ? What does it mean for us to be a part of our community? What does it mean for us to make Jesus, to raise Jesus up in all things that we do, and to just not lose the plot in all of that? And so that's really what we've tried to do with, some ups and downs as every church experiences. And yeah, we've grown. Post COVID, we're back up to about 200, 250 people. Pre-COVID, we were in between 3 and 4, and so yeah, we've never grown to be a massive, a massive gathering or anything. But the Lord has just preserved us, blessed us for sure.
Yeah. Well, some people listening to this would say that is a massive gathering, So
That's true.
like
That's
I
true.
pastor a church of about 80. So and
It's relative, isn't it?
yeah, no, yeah, but it's great. And I think again, what your heart is that we are making it simple, approachable, and really sharing the body of Christ as the community of Christ that influences the community around them. And so and keeping Jesus the focus, I think is awesome. So as you've planted and as you've grown, how do you rely on church members?
Well, it's funny. We've never had a large staff. I was a solo pastor for many years, so I was the guy who was leading worship and preaching and, doing all the stuff in between, because again, we just didn't have the means to hire staff. We do have some staff now, but really, since the very beginning, we really relied on deacon teams, volunteer teams, to accomplish a lot of the work of the ministry. And so we started that way, and the whole goal wasn't to grow a large staff, but was to try to get everybody involved in the ways that they could be involved, as a way to, I think, taking ownership of the church, so that it's not just, hey, the professional people do the work, or the lead pastor does, he's the guy we're paying, so he should do all the work. But it was really just to kind of adopt a mentality of good, healthy, church ownership that says, hey, this is our church. This is not Ronnie's church. What can we do to invest and to serve? And so because we had no other options in our early years, that's what we did. And that still really kind of empowers a lot of what we do is our volunteer teams and people just coming into the church, finding a lot of joy in serving, hopefully not over serving, but, establishing ways for them to serve in a way that's healthy for them, and also just continues, as our body continues to grow, allows it to be something that I think promotes really good church health in the same way. So
Yeah, and have you what kind of intentional strategies have you implemented to kind of foster that idea?
well, I think, when somebody becomes a member of our church, one of the things we talk about is, during the membership interview, I'll call it, is, we lay out all these different areas and opportunities that they'll have to serve. And that's a bit of a non-option for us. So if you become a member of the church, you gotta invest in some way. And there's a lot of grace in the ways that you can do that and the time that you have to do that. But we talk a lot about serving and what a joy it is to serve, and how, how much Paul talks about serving one another in the New Testament. And so we just make that kind of a foundational element to what we do as people become members of the church. And so far, that's it's been something that has been a blessing for us, to see people just really, kind of take that to heart and take ownership of that. It's been really neat.
Yeah, that's great. Can you tell me about a time? I mean, you've been through ups and downs in ministry, obviously. I just tried. One day we're not going to talk about COVID anymore. So but I'm not saying you can't use as an example.
Right.
But can you tell me about a time when you felt built up in ministry?
Yeah, it's funny that's a great question, because I'm really convinced that pastors are typically running on an encouragement deficit, is what I like to say. We're always looking to be encouraged. We're so often not encouraged. And I think some of my greatest encouragements have just come from church members who, will occasionally, just come up unprompted and say, hey, I really appreciated something you said, or I've been praying for you. And I just want you to know that, I appreciate what you're doing. And I'm really, when I look around, I'm excited to see the work that God is doing here in the church. It can just be a word. It can just be one sentence. And it doesn't take much to be built up and to feel built up. And that's why what you said at the beginning of the program, just, hey, it's a good thing to encourage pastors. As much as pastors need to be encouragers, it's a great thing for the congregation to take responsibility in being the encouragement for their pastors. So I just think it's just small things like that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. In my research, that's really you hit it on just right on the head. There is that pastors aren't complicated. It doesn't take a lot, and but we lead with the heart, right? We believe that we have a sacred calling, and we're serving the Lord, and we don't want to let Him down. And sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. And
Yeah.
somebody saying something specific, as you just mentioned, is actually huge. A lot of people say thank you every week. I mean, that's just what they do. But for someone to say, hey, what you said really meant something to me, or for them to call out, hey, look what's going on in the church, and that they're seeing it. That's a beautiful thing. And one thing you mentioned in one of your other interviews, which I find just fascinating and I love, was you were with, I think, your leadership team, and I think you kind of told them, I don't know if you said it this directly, so you can correct me, but hey, we need to quit looking at the negative, and we need to start looking at what's going well. So what kind of led you to kind of think about that and make that shift?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what that was. I do remember a time when I felt like we weren't very good at celebrating
Yeah.
the thing that God was doing. And so you can get into a habit as a leader, being on a leadership team, where you're constantly breaking down the things that need to be improved, or these are the things that we need to find some growth in. And again, you got to do that. And as a way to, shepherd God's flock with, faithfulness and integrity. But I came to a place where I said, it feels like we're not celebrating the good things and the great things and the hopeful things that we see God is doing. So we need to create space to do that. It can't just all be what I would say doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And even if it's not doom and gloom, but it's just very good, constructive things. If we don't find time to celebrate them, we're missing some really large pieces of what we need to be cultivating in our hearts in terms of gratefulness and gratitude. So when we're missing those opportunities to celebrate, we're missing opportunities to be grateful. And, you can just create an environment where things get, I would say, way too serious. We're beginning to take ourselves way too seriously. And you don't leave any room for grace in that. So leaving space for celebration creates, I think, lanes for gratitude and grace to come in and then kind of permeate your culture a little bit. And so it's a thing that I have to be careful of, because I can just be a little too honest and a little too gloomy at times, I think. So
Well, that's the producer in you, just always
Mhm.
criticizing everything and looking for those little things. And
Breaking it down.
but yeah,
Yeah.
and it's never right,
Good
right?
fault. Good fault. Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's you just mentioned some beautiful things, or leaving space for grace. I think that we again, take ourselves so seriously, and I think it boils down to a lack of trust that the Holy Spirit's doing His work.
100%.
And often what we look for tangible measurements are not necessarily true growth. And so we have to pause and go, oh, let's look at this person who's now coming to church more consistently, or now their spouse is coming and they started bringing their kids, or, hey, they weren't serving for 2 years and now all of a sudden they're serving. And so I think
Yeah.
we have to pause and take a look at that, because
Mm.
otherwise, we just get in that mode of work, and we're pretty hard critics on ourselves. And we, especially those of us who have come out of the musician industry, we tend to be a little bit more critical. I have a quick story. Years ago when I was leading worship, I had this guest that would come and we play once a month, and really good, phenomenal guitar player. And we were talking afterwards about the places we messed up because we hadn't practiced enough, and the pastor comes up and he starts listening to the conversation. And he interrupts us and he goes, "You know what? That's your disadvantage because we all thought it was great." I'm like, that's a good point. The 3 notes that we missed out of how many thousands we play. Anyway.
That nobody on earth heard.
Right. Well, but that's all we remember, right?
Exactly.
The whole thing.
Exactly.
So over the years, tell me what you maybe has found the most challenging aspect of ministry.
Well, I think it goes back to a little bit of what we talked about a minute ago, I think, which is, I think just this feeling of isolation and loneliness. If you talk to most pastors, there's a shared experience with that, and it doesn't matter how big our churches are. It doesn't matter how big our staffs are, I think there is just being a leader, it can be a lonely world to be a leader. And I think that's probably been my biggest challenge, I think, is navigating, I think some of the challenges that are inherent to leadership, and especially pastoral leadership, which is just that sometimes you are in an encouragement, kind of wilderness, and you do need somebody to tell you that you're not crazy, you're doing okay. And remember to trust the Lord. He has this. And there are, as you well know, there are seasons in your life where you don't receive a lot of that.
Right.
And for whatever reason, and it really caused you to kind of go back to the table. I lift my eyes up to the Lord. From where does my help come from? Right. And to have those moments in the life of a pastor, they probably come far too often. But I think through time, you feel them very, very deeply. And I've felt them very deeply. Just that sense of loneliness, isolation. And so those have been really challenging kind of wilderness moments that the Lord has definitely brought me through, over the years. Sometimes very painful, but very growing as well. Very, moments where I've experienced a lot of growth and opportunities to just say, hey, what is this all about that I'm doing? And, where do I see the Lord at work? And what do I need to reshift in my thinking and in what I'm looking at and what I'm prioritizing, so that I can, I can have a greater, understanding and gratitude for the work that the Lord is doing that I'm just having a hard time seeing.
Can you speak to any of those moments when you felt that way, and maybe how God used church members to meet that challenge? Paul's talks about the different people that would refresh him, and we know that Moses had some help along the way, and Elijah got Elisha, and so just kind of I know that when we get in that isolation, right, where it's us and the Lord, and we're relying on the Lord to minister to us, but often it takes sometimes somebody outside of us to kind of speak into our lives or to come alongside. So do you have a moment when that's happened maybe for you?
Yeah, there's definitely been many moments. I can think of one in particular. I was this was a few years ago, but this one sticks out. I remember I was having it was a particularly bad Sunday, and I don't remember exactly why. But we have bad Sundays, right? As pastors, right? Where it just nothing comes together, nothing flows. We're in we're just in a mood, or we're just downcast, or whatever it is, And I don't know if it was just a Sunday or a particular season, but I remember that night, one of our core couples who planted the church with us. I remember it just, again, bad day, and I remember getting a knock on the door on Sunday night, and there was, one of our friends, and he was just holding a bag of ice cream, and he just put his hand through the door. I opened the screen. He put his hand through the door, and he said, "Hey," he said, "I don't know why, but I just felt like you needed this. You could really use this tonight. You could really use a couple of pints of ice cream, and you could really use me telling you that I think you're doing a good job, and that the Lord is at work. And hey, eat some ice cream, get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." And that was just the work of the Holy Spirit right there in the flesh, another church member just there sacrificing to encourage me, but also him feeling that prompting, by the Spirit to do that, and that was just a beautiful moment where we see, the body serving one another, helping us in our weaknesses, and it was a really great moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think a lot of times, the expectation for pastors is we have to be on Sunday, right? It's got to be, that's
Yeah.
our game day type thing. And
Right.
and when we have people, and I want to encourage church members who listen to this too, if you feel that prompting, don't ignore it. Don't think that the pastor isn't blessed by you, or doesn't need, even if you just send them a text or something saying, "Hey, I appreciate you," or whatnot. And so, but you mentioned something that's interesting. It's very controversial in a lot of churches, but you called this church member a friend.
Mm.
And so tell me about what your idea is about pastors creating friendships with church members.
Well, I think it's dangerous. I think it's inherently filled with much risk. And I would say that we are called to that risk taking. I think we need to do it with wisdom and discernment. But if we are part of the body, I think that includes forming friendships that are part of the body. I think we also need to have friends that are outside of the body as pastors. I have both. So I have friends in the body. I also have friends outside of the body, and friends that I have outside of the body that are pastors. I'm able to have good and healthy conversations with that I wouldn't be able to have on the inside, and that's necessary. But I also need to have those deeper connections with people from the church body, right? Because these are the people that God has called me to minister to. And this is where I'm able to, and again, I'm a church member too. I'm not just the pastor, I'm a fellow church member. So to me, my philosophy would be that it's important for me to cultivate friendships with wisdom and discernment, but have some people that I can be vulnerable with, that I can trust. And these should be men and women that can pray for me, that can know a little bit more about my life than maybe the average church member does, because I need that level of support and help, and I need people that I can be vulnerable with. And again, you got to be wise in how you do that. But I think it's filled with risk. Why? Well, because relationships don't always go well,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to be hurt. I've been hurt by church members who were friends and then weren't friends. And there's a lot to navigate with that. So I don't think the answer is to pull away, but I think the answer is to say, Lord, friendships in general are just full of we got to be courageous when we step into any friendship, when we cultivate any friendship. And so it's just another way that we get to experience, I think, the grace of God, especially when those friendships don't go well, so yeah, full of risk, but I think it's the right risk.
Yeah. No, I like that take on it. You're not going to be BFFs with everybody in the church.
Correct.
But I like that you are a church member. I mean, you're part of the body of Christ, fulfilling your role. I have one pastor friend that has a couple good friends, and sometimes he'll be like, because the question is, how do you fulfill your role as a pastor if they're a really good friend? And this guy says, well, it's easy. He goes, I just tell my friend, hey, just so for this conversation, I'm putting my pastor hat on for you, just so you know.
That's good.
And I find that sometimes I can minister better if I know people a little bit better. I can speak in their lives a little more intentionally. But I do find it's very difficult. Some conferences that I've done, I've had you could just see some guys really uncomfortable with the conversation about being friends with church members.
Yeah.
And And I
Yeah.
say, well, is your wife a church member? And they'll go, yeah. I said, are you her pastor? And they'll go, yeah. I said, how does that work? I mean, there's a different, there's a designation of roles, and so, but definitely a risk worth taking, but be wise in the risk with fear and
Well,
trepidation and prayer. Yeah.
yeah, and let me just say, I don't want this to come off, I think, glib or flippant, because I've been wounded severely by church members, and so that's a real thing,
Yeah.
and it hurts a lot more when it's coming from a church member than it would even from somebody on the outside, because we are connected, we are knit together, in a way that is unique, and so I think the pain is going to be unique as well when those friendships maybe go south. So for somebody that might be going through that, you might need some time, and you might need a season where you need to think about, what that looks like for you. And so definitely pastors that have really experienced some pain, we wouldn't want to minimize that, because it's a deeper pain, it's a unique pain for sure. And I have a lot of sympathy for that since I've experienced it. Yeah, very
Yeah. I
difficult.
mean, David writes about that. We went to
Oh
worship
yeah,
together, and
100%.
you stabbed me in the back, basically, is what he
I
says.
know. Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I mean, we don't. Again, I appreciate you saying that. We don't want to minimize the pain, but at the same time, we don't want to use that as an excuse not to move forward and to engage in future relationships.
I don't
Because
think so. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that would be stepping back into a place then that puts you in a position where then you're more of a professional pastor. You're just kind of stepping in. You're losing that more intimate connection with your congregation. And these are people that these are people of whom you are preaching into their lives as a way that you experience a shared life with. And to do that effectively, you have to share a life with them. And but it's complicated. It
yeah,
is complicated for sure. Yeah. So it's a tension.
yeah, no, and the tension is okay. That's all
Yeah.
right. You know. So tell me how someone in your church has made you smile within the last couple of weeks.
Oh man. Just last night I was teaching. I teach a once a month doctrine class at the church, and just kind of a newer member, who's well probably been around maybe a year and a half, so not super new, but newer compared with some. And this woman just recently got married, and she just came up and just really had some very kind, sweet words to say. And it just put a smile on my face. It was just so encouraging. It happened at the end of the night, so it's been a long day for me, and so I got to come home, and my wife was home when I got home, and she asked, how did it go? And I said, well, Sarah had some really kind things to say, and I was smiling when I was telling her that. And kind of going back to what we said at the very beginning of the show, it doesn't take much. She just had a few encouraging comments for me, and we got into a little bit of a conversation, and it was really sweet. So.
Yeah. That's great. I find it one of my exhortation to pastors is to be intentional about looking for those moments, because we can get caught up, as you kind of mentioned, in the workings of the ministry. What didn't go well? How do we improve? What's the next thing that we're going on to? And I find it intentional daily, if not weekly, to pause and go, okay, let me just think about how God has used some of these people in my life this week, and what's really going on, because otherwise we miss it and we find ourselves quickly into burnout,
Yeah.
and exhausted emotionally and depersonalized and feeling like a failure. And so I always challenge pastors, hey, how has someone made you smile in the last couple of weeks? Because sometimes we don't even think about that, right?
It's a great question. Yeah. If we're not looking for, because it's probably happened, but we got to be intentional about looking for it. That's a really good word.
Yeah, yeah. So what's the desire for the people at your church?
Well, the desire, I think, is that they grow in greater love and affection for Jesus. I mean, I think that's the baseline right there. That's the foundation. Are we growing in our joy and our love and our affection for Christ? And are we growing in all the different areas and ways that He's given us to accomplish that? Time in the Word and prayer with one another, encouraging one another. But that's really, I think, the baseline for me is I just want to see people growing in their affection for the Lord. So,
So if people wanted to check your church out, how would they find you?
substance-church.org.
Okay.
and they can find all the information on there, as well as we upload the weekly sermons on the site, so they can, if they want to check out a sermon, they can hear it there as well. So
I'll put that in the comment section also. Um,
cool.
and so I appreciate it. Hey, just on a personal note, any future music endeavors coming out that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I'm trying to finish my second solo album right now, so I'm probably 70% there, and just working furiously to try to get to an October 1st release date. So
Okay.
I'm not sure it's going to happen, but that's what we're working towards.
Yeah, and I know if you just Google Ronnie Martin music, you'll find it. Your SEO settings are awesome, so there you're
Oh,
there.
thanks. Thanks. Yeah, I think you can go to ronniemartin.org too, is my personal site, and it has all information on the books and the music and all that stuff.
Yeah, and
So.
so on the books, I just wanted to highlight for a moment. Can you tell me about the book that you wrote for small church pastors?
Yeah, well, it's called Pastoring Small Towns, and I wrote it with a guy named Donnie Griggs, who pastors in Morehead City, North Carolina, and so we both have big hearts for small town pastors, and we wanted to write something that would encourage guys, because it's the majority of pastors in America are small town pastors, and yet a lot of the books that are written, especially leadership books that are written, are for kind of big and growing churches, and we just have a heart for people that are doing those works that most people are never going to see, and that kind of that are very under the radar. And so yeah, it was just a book to kind of taking some of the unique aspects of what it means to pastor in a small town, and then just to encourage pastors who are doing it, who are not surrounded with, large networks of pastors and people to encourage them. So that was the big idea behind the book.
That's great. I'll put a link to that in the comments as well. It kind of reminded me of when I was a worship leader with Calvary Chapel for 20 years. I was at a small church first before I went to just south of Albuquerque in Belen, New Mexico, a church about 2,000 people there. But I was in a small church, 80 people or so. Well, actually, it was 12, and then anyway, but that's a longer story. But I would go to these worship conferences, and you got these guys that have paid staff, paid musicians, and these big worship bands, and all these technology, and you'd be like, yeah, I can't do that where I'm at. And
I
so
know.
so
No.
you're always looking for those resources because a lot of times these large churches, the pastors did start very meager, or they had a handful of people, and now we're talking 25 years later,
Yeah.
and we need to hear what happened at year 3 and 4, and so I appreciate the work that you do.
Well, thanks.
So yeah, so Ronnie, thanks so much. I really appreciate you just spending some time. I know you're busy, not only pastoring a church, but writing music, being creative, spending the time being creative is sometimes a challenge as a pastor. Get lost in that process is difficult, and so I appreciate you taking the time and all the work that you are doing and have done and continue to do to work together to build up the body as we grow in love and we help the church flourish. So thanks so much.